All right, thank you very much, Travis. I appreciate it. Again, as he said, my name is Stacey Schwabenlander, and I'm a veterinarian with the Board of Animal Health here in Minnesota. I oversee the Scrapy program as well as animal disease traceability. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of Scrapy as well as a few other things. But first, for those of you who are really new to this industry, perhaps those in 4-H, if this is your first year, I wanted to start off by just letting you know who the Minnesota Board of Animal Health is. So we are the state agency here in Minnesota that oversees voluntary and mandatory disease control programs for all the domestic animals here in the state of Minnesota. And we have veterinarians and animal health advisors who work within the St. Paul office in Minnesota, as well as throughout the state of Minnesota, who help to implement these programs. Today specifically, though, we're going to do a really quick overview of Scrapy, the disease itself, as well as the importance of registering your flock or herd with the Board of Animal Health. We'll talk about official identification, record keeping, and how those two things are just ultimately the vital pieces for animal disease traceability. First off, for those of you who are familiar with Scrapy, you'll likely already know that Scrapy is a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, or also known as a TSE. There are multiple different types of TSEs. Scrapy just happens to be one of the very oldest. There's actual documentation that Scrapy has been around for more than 250 years. There's undocumented evidence that says Scrapy has actually been found as early as the 15th or even 17th centuries, including the Roman Empire. So this disease has been around for a long time. The disease is caused by something called a prion, which is commonly referred to as a misfolded protein. And these prions are the infectious agents that cause the disease in both sheep and goats. Scrapy is a concern here in the US and Minnesota because of its huge economic impacts. So the fact that we have not maintained or acquired Scrapy free status yet means that we actually suffer from about $10 to $20 million of economic impact just from having Scrapy here. The reason that we want to eradicate Scrapy is so that we can get rid of those economic impacts, along with, of course, getting rid of a disease that impacts a lot of producers. Every year, it impacts fewer and fewer, but we still have Scrapy, and we are going to work as hard as we can to get rid of that. Again, I mentioned this is an eradication program, which is different from a control program. We are not trying to control and stop the spread and just keep it located in certain areas and keep it from spreading. We're trying to get rid of it all the way around. And you can see that there's a link on the page there. There's a lot of helpful links on the Board of Animal Health's website, and the link that you see on your screen is specific to the National Scrapie Eradication Program. And I will happily add some of those links to the chat later on as well, so that you can get them and copy and paste if you're interested in that. So just keep in mind, you don't need to try to copy anything down. I'm happy to share those a little bit later on. So Scrapy is a disease that affects both sheep and goats, and it's transmitted with the afterbirth. So typically, the big concern is when the ewe is lambing or the doe is kidding, they produce the placenta and allantoic fluids, which is a specific fluid during the afterbirth process that contains the infectious agents. So any lambs, kids, other goats or sheep that are around can potentially ingest that infected material and then later develop the disease themselves. So that's the point that we're most concerned about with transmitting the disease. Ultimately, the disease ends up causing problems with brain, muscle, and the central nervous system, and signs will appear about 2 to 5 years after the animals are infected. Generally, we'll see that animals will show clinical signs of the disease when they're around 3 to 4 years of age, which is not surprising since they may be infected as young kids or lambs during the actual birthing process when they are when they are ingesting some of those infected materials. The animals can show various signs that will make one think that Scrapy is a risk. They can become nervous or aggressive. They can have intense rubbing, which is actually how Scrapy was originally named because they were scraping off their wool. Tremors and head pressing, along with weight loss and decreased appetite. Now, keep in mind, these sorts of signs can be also evidence of different diseases. So don't jump to any conclusions, but keep in mind Scrapy as a differential if you start to see concerns in your herds or your flocks, and please make certain you call your herd veterinarian as soon as possible if you see any concerns. Genetic susceptibility is well known in sheep, and there's a lot of research that's still ongoing with the goat population. And we aren't going to get into the details of that, mainly because we just don't have time today. But just a consideration to be aware of is that genetic susceptibility piece, which is something that is somewhat unique and well known about Scrapy, but is still being investigated in some of the other diseases. And unfortunately, Scrapy has no cure or treatment, and it is invariably fatal. So the first step, now that you know what Scrapy is, and a little bit about why we need to eradicate it, the important thing is for the Board of Animal Health to be aware of where herds and flocks are here in Minnesota so that we can ensure that everyone is educated about the National Scrapie Eradication Program. So the easiest way to do that is to go to the Board of Animal Health's website, and you can see an image there, and as well as the link. And on the upper left-hand side of the website is a forms menu, as you can see with that green arrow. And the livestock and premises registration form is the link that you want to click on in order to access the registration form to register for the Scrapie program. Under that form, you'll see an option for sheep and goats. So you want to select sheep and goats, and then there'll be multiple fields that are presented to you, and all you have to do is fill out that information, and that gets submitted to the board. And then we will follow up with you individually and give you a whole bunch of information on Scrapy and help answer any questions that you may have. One of the advantages of registering with this program is if you are not already registered and you're new, you may have the opportunity to get no cost official identification ear tags. Official ID, for anyone who's new, is a good way to think about it is a social security number for your animal. So it's a unique number that only one animal can have, and it's not duplicated for any other animal. So that official number is their unique indicator to specifically point out that animal amongst all the others. So this no cost option from USDA allows newly registered sheep and goat producers to get up to 100 plastic ear tags. And those ear tags are flock ID or herd ID ear tags. So those tags can be applied to the animals that are born into your flocks and herds. Again, there's up to 100 of those. And at current point, the funding for that program for the no cost tags goes through September 30th of 2022. It's hard to say what'll happen after that. So if you're not yet registered, it's a great opportunity to take advantage of that. In addition, larger concentration points such as markets also have free or no cost tags available to them. So in situations where you are unable to tag your animal for some reason before you bring it to, for example, a livestock market, there are an opportunity for animals to get tagged there. In an ideal world, we would love to see them tagged with their flock IDs in their birth farm. But if that's not possible, there is another opportunity. And why is that important? Well, the no cost tags are an opportunity to help get people who are new to owning sheep and goats with official ID in their hands. Because sheep and goats under Minnesota rule do have to be identified with official ID before they are commingled with any other animals after they are moved from the herd or flock. So one easy thing to remember as the owner of sheep and goats is animals should never come onto your property unless they already have those official ID tags in their ears. So keep in mind, if you're buying a new ewe, a ram, a doe, whatever the case, you want it to already be identified with official ID. So that's a great question to ask when you're acquiring animals. There's very limited circumstances where animals can move without ID, and those animals are only moving in slaughter channels, and that has to do with these restricted movement feeder animals. And we won't get into those details today, but just keep in mind, a good thing to remember, always have official ID when you acquire any sheep or goats. So what specifically is official ID and what are the options? Here are some examples and some photographs of what official ID looks like. So there are 3 different groups of official identification ear tags that are going to be official in all circumstances. So the flock ID tags, these serial tags that I mentioned that are used by livestock concentration points, as well as animal identification number tags, which are commonly referred to as RFID tags, as they are most commonly radio frequency identification tags, though they also come in a visual format. So you can see the options right here. These plastic flock ID tags are an example of what would be available at no cost to newly registered producers. These metal tags, these orange metal tags, are the current color and type of tag that are available from concentration points. Some of you may be familiar with the white ones. This was the color the tags were in the past, and they also come in a plastic option. And then these AIN tags that are prefixed with 840 for showing that they were born in the US. These come in multiple different types and forms. They come in bangle tags, they come in button tags, they can come in more of a rectangular form. There's all different kinds of tags that you can see, and depending on the manufacturer you would use to purchase your tags. So these are just a few options of what you might see for official ID. And again, these tags are going to be official for any sort of movement, for testing, for anything like that that might be done. There's additionally a few other options for official ID. However, these are not universally accepted as official. So as an example, these would not be official for animals that are moving through livestock concentration points such as markets or within slaughter channels. But if you're going to an exhibition, as an example, here in Minnesota, you could go to that exhibition with an official ear tag, an official tattoo. And our website, again, you can see the details down below there with that link that I'll also share later. And these official tattoos can be used as official ID here in Minnesota for the requirement for ID that we have for animals going to exhibitions. So there's either the option of registered animals. So if you have a registered flock or herd with a breed registry, that can be considered official as long as the registration number accompanies that tattoo. So we like to see that those things paired up so we know that they're fully registered, because pending registrations are not considered official. Or if you aren't registered with a breed association, you can contact the Board of Animal Health and we can get you registered with a state issued tattoo. And there's an example of what that might look like as an example in the ears for both of those. In addition, there's also those AIN numbers I talked about earlier, the animal identification numbers with the 840 prefix. That is also available as an implant. And those are acceptable as well, but there's various conditions associated with that. And it can be quite onerous. So I would refer you to our website to see the details of that. And there's a link to USDA's website on there that gives all of the requirements for what needs to accompany an animal in order for that implant to actually be official identification. And this is just a slide. It's not meant for you to read all of the details. I just wanted to make you aware that there are rules that apply to people who actually apply the ID tags themselves to their animals. This information again is on our website, but keep in mind, if you're applying these official ear tags, there are specific information that you do need to keep in your records in order to have good records that help us in an animal disease situation. So this is just a really quick view of that. Again, the details are on our website. The most important thing to know is when you apply official ID, keep in mind that you want to find out what information you should be capturing each time you apply a tag. So why is official ID needed? Well, we talked about some of the reasons. One of the other reasons is to help with these scrapie eradication efforts. So each state has a number of sheep and a number of goats from their own state that need to be sampled every year for scrapie to help show that we're working towards proving that we do not have scrapie here in the US. So in Minnesota, we have to collect this year 405 sheep that are from Minnesota and 84 goats, again, that are from Minnesota. And we need to show that those animals have tested negative for scrapie. So you can help by letting us know if you have any animals that are either found dead or euthanized if they're over 18 months of age, and get them sent in for testing. So if you have that situation, you'll want to contact your veterinarian who can work with the diagnostic facility to get that done. This is another example. Again, I don't intend for you to keep track of all of the details on this screen. What the important thing that I'd like to relay is that there's also rules that govern the type of information that you capture for where you get your animals from and where you sell your animals or dispose of them. So again, this information can be found on our website, and the important thing to keep track of is that there are important records that need to be documented when you buy and sell animals. And part of those records, when required, is to document those official identification numbers. And why is all that important? Well, we are going to get to that in just one moment. One last thing I wanted to mention is if you're bringing animals in from out of state, keep in mind that there might be additional requirements that you need to follow to do that. So a great place to look for that information is on our import screen. And here's a quick diagram of where you can find that on our website, as well as the web link, or interstatelivestock.com is additionally a very helpful website that will walk you through various questions to learn what import requirements are for the type of animals you're looking to import from a specific state. All right. Really quickly, I want to help you get an understanding of the importance of ID and record keeping based on a fictitious example of finding scrapie. So we're going to start out to explain traceability by pretending that this red ewe has been found to have scrapie after going to slaughter at a slaughter plant. So the first thing that we want to do is talk to the slaughter plant and find out, where did this red ewe come from? Now, hopefully this red ewe had official identification, so that will get us down to the exact animal and be able to trace her back to the farm that she came from. Luckily, the slaughter plant is able to tell us that this red ewe came from farm B. So the next step in an investigation to trace this animal and disease is going to be to visit farm B. What we find out here is that the producer was not sure whether or not the ewe lambed in the last season. So we have kind of a question mark on her lamb. But because there's no evidence to prove that she did not lamb, we are going to work on the assumption that she did, because we need to be better safe than sorry. So we're going to assume that this sheep lambed before she was sent to slaughter, and that all the other sheep on this property could have potentially been exposed to the infected placenta and fluids at the time of that lambing. So later on, we'll look at where a good example of this green animal and the blue animal, we're going to look at how we trace those forward. But first thing we need to do is find out, is this where this red ewe was born? And the producer luckily had records with her official identification number and is able to tell us that he purchased her from Farm A. So next, we are able to use this producer's records to go back and learn that Farm A is actually where this red ewe was born. So luckily, we don't have to trace any further back, but now we have 2 farms that might have been infected with Scrapy. And what we have to do next is follow all of the animals forward that might have been on the property and exposed to this ewe at any point when she was lambing where we think she might have been transmitting the disease. So next step, we're going to ignore the trace forward from Farm A just because the slides get too complicated. And we're going to take a peek here at Farm B. And what we know from the farmer's records, again, the importance of keeping those really good records is Farm B is able to tell us that he sold this green ewe to Farm D along with her lamb, who is now over here, and he sold this blue ewe to Farm C along with her lamb. So now we know that Scrapy could potentially have moved to 2 new farms here in Minnesota, and then we would have to trace all of those animals as well, determine any sort of testing needs that they have. But this is a really simplistic view, I will admit, but what I'm trying to do is help you to understand how we use identification and records to be able to trace things back and forth in an animal disease situation. And because I'm running low on time and we have more presenters yet, I have 2 more slides that I really quickly want to show you. This is to show you a real life example of animal disease traceability in action. Now, this is granted not a sheep or a goat example. This are real traces that Board of Animal Health and USDA staff here in Minnesota have performed from March of 2017 through January of this year. We've performed 317 cattle traces for potentially exposed cattle that have entered and moved throughout the state of Minnesota, being exposed to bovine tuberculosis in 7 different herds in 4 different states. So these circles show you how many traces and their distribution throughout the state. The bigger the circle means there were more traces to that specific area. And you can see just how many there are. The different colors tell you how many different times those animals moved. So it's hard to discern some of the colors, but the one on the left, that means that's the first time the animals landed here in Minnesota. This green one means they moved from 1 prem in Minnesota to a 2nd prem in Minnesota. And the gray means they moved to a 3rd prem and on down the line. So this just gives you an idea of the importance of tracking official ID when needed and having really good records of knowing where you get your animals from and where you sell your animals to. Because the better records we have, the more information we have, the more quickly we can get a hold and get our arms around these disease circumstances and be able to eradicate or control disease more quickly. And we can't do that without all of your help. One last image is to show a total outcome again of those bovine tuberculosis traces we did in cattle. This is an image to show it looks really messy, I will fully admit. And this is again shows all of the traces we did. And this image includes the states that we either received traces from or sent traces to, just to show you how complicated things can get. This right here is South Dakota. This right here is Wisconsin. So you can see those are some of the states that we worked the most with on these traces. And again, this is just to show a really quick example of real life animal disease traceability and how complicated it can get. And that exactly speaks to just how important it is to have really good records for ID and where you buy and sell your animals. All right, that's it for now. I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen and let Mr. Persons take over.